Spark V2. First impressions is actually somewhere in the middle of the spectrum in terms of the speed. Of course, I do expect the puzzle to speed up. On outer appearance, the Spark V2 looks extremely similar to the Aofu WRM. Both cubes are rounded all over, with 4 outer holes being larger than the rest. They are also extremely similar to each other in size. Both cubes measure 64.5mm and have nearly identical layer sizing. The other top of the line 7x7, the Meilong, is about 1.2mm smaller, and it has the same size outer layer with smaller inners, and also the pieces are just less round. Some people have said that the Spark V2 is similar to the Hong 5x5, which I do have to agree a bit. The Spark V2 has an extremely crunchy feel, which the Hong also seems to have some of it, although the Spark is significantly crunchier, which is understandable due to having more pieces. Compared against the two Moi 7x7s, the Meilong is the smoothest and it feels almost flat, while the Aofu WRM is also still quite a lot smoother than the Spark V2, but it has a slight bit more crunch than the Meilong. When it comes to handling, the Spark V2 lands itself in the middle of the spectrum. The Aofu WRM is the most similar to the Spark V1 of the three, both in terms of its feel, which is a slight crunch but mostly smoothness, and also its overall rock solid feel and handling. It's also the slowest cube of the bunch. Back in the day when I still had the Spark V1, I actually spring compressed it to make it faster, whereas with my Aofu WRM, I left the springs in the original state, but I Dorito modded the cube. All 3 layers, which is actually more than what the typical Dorito mod would have done. Also, my Aofu WRM does not have a ball core because the base cube is already way more stable than the ball core Spark V2 and the ball core Meilong. And I once actually had a second Aofu WRM that I modded a ball core into, but it's too slow and I ended up preferring this one. The Meilong, on the other hand, feels more similar to the Gun 562, with its significantly faster speed than other 7x7s, smaller size, and very flat, smooth feel. It is theoretically the least stable of the 3, but it's still stable enough for you to spam outer layer turns at high speeds, while the remaining 6 layers remain stuck together like a brick with like 0 unwanted flex. The Meilong, however, has the worst corner cutting of the 3, even though I can still reverse corner cut quite a sizable bit. Like, this is mostly due to it having the smallest holes, but I do think that the corner cutting is still good enough for me not to Florian mod my own cube, but I have done Florian mod, like for a friend. The Spark V2 in comparison is faster and way more airy than the Aofu in its feel, and it's also a little bit more fluid and flexible when you transition between layers. However, it's still a fair bit slower and heavier than the Meilong, and in general it feels like a sweet spot between the two. If you want the corner cutting and the brute force spammability of the Aofu, with the speed and lightness of the Meilong, the Spark V2 would get you somewhere in between. When it comes to the magnet strength, the Aofu has the strongest magnets. The Spark and the Meilong have comparable magnets, but due to the faster speed of the Meilong, the magnets are much more noticeable. Whereas on the Spark, you are pushing through significantly more friction, which makes the magnetic click take up a smaller percentage of your turning force. The Spark V2 also comes stock with a magnetic core, while the Meilong and Aofu do not. But as mentioned earlier, I prefer not to add a magnetic core to my Aofu, and I did add one in the Meilong that is comparable in strength with the Spark, again with the lower friction making this one more noticeable. But since not everybody is going to glue in the same magnetic core with the same strength into the Meilong 7, I'm going to compare with something more objective. Like, the strength of the magnetic core in the Spark is slightly below that of the Gun 562, and it's nowhere as crazy as the X-Men Hong. The X-Men Hong really feels like you're going over a speed bump with every turn. Like, it takes more effort to begin your turn and less effort to end.
This video is sponsored by Cubewerkz, the homegrown cube retailer of Singapore, serving the community since 2013. In addition to a physical cube store with a wide variety of puzzles, there is also an online store and a cubing academy.
When it comes to mechanism, there isn't really that much unique things I can say about the Spark V2. It lacks the anti-deforming mechanism that the Aofu WRM has. The Meilong doesn't have the anti-deforming mech either, but the Qi 9x9 V2 has, and I'll talk more about it when I make a video on this cube. Spark V2 also have the same hollow design that has been around since the Wu Shuang, and which carry on onto like the Wu Ji and also like the Shadow and the Spark and the Valk 5. But when I think the Hong and the Ambition came out, they actually did away with a feature known as the reverse footlock. So to look at the Shadow V2 pieces, you can see that there's a small spike coming out of the back of this edge, and it hooks underneath the hollow corner. So you can't simply pull this edge out. Compare that with the Hong. You can slide it, and so can the Spark V2. You can also likewise slide it. There's no hook that goes under the hollow corner. I think it's more important for these kinds of pieces that are very easy to pop out. And you can still see, okay, against a darker color background of my finger, you can see the backward hooking spike. This reverse footlock feature is actually quite a unique feature of the Chi cubes, and I do feel like that's one of their characteristics. So I do find it a little bit disappointing to see that feature disappear. But other than that, I do think the modern cubes also don't really pop that much, so it may not be that necessary. So generally, the Spark V2 is like a 7x7 adaptation of the Hong with a few minor differences. Namely the magnetic core. So of course, I core magnetize my Shadow V2 as well, but this is a DIY one that was done even before most third-party stores were doing it. But with the Hong and the Spark, however, these are default from the factory. So I can show you, the Hong actually uses a standard core with an extra like ball piece glued over it, and the distance between the corner and the core is extremely close. The magnets almost touch each other, which explains why the Hong has such a crazy strong magnetic core. Whereas if you compare with the Spark V2, you can see a little gap between the corner and the core. And the core is not standard core with an extra part glued on top of it. It's just an entire one-piece casted magnetic core. Another unusual feature of the Spark V2 is that it is completely missing torpedoes. So you can see that the Hong piece here has a torpedo and the Spark V2 piece does not. Normally this torpedo is just there to prevent explosions, and I think the modern cubes are usually tightened enough and stable enough not to suddenly explode. But I have watched some other people's review and they claim that without the torpedoes, the corners are actually put a little bit closer towards the core and they sink in a little bit, which I haven't really found that effect very noticeable at all. After using the Spark V2 for a while, I did change my opinion on how the performance of the cube is. What I described as stability and speed earlier is mostly a function of spring strength, which seems more apparent when testing the cube on the table, but in actual solves there seem to be a few extra factors working against the Spark V2. I said earlier that the Meilong is only theoretically the least stable one of the three, mainly because it has the weaker springs and it feels more free and less pressed together. However, the cube still feels relatively solid when you're turning fast and it has very little flex. While the Spark V2, however, actually flexes more than the Meilong in actual solves, and it relies more on the springs and the magnets to rebound it back to cube shape. I have also said that the Aofu WRM is the slowest, but again, it is mostly due to the springs pressing the cube harder, but the Spark V2 also has more friction in it. So the speed differences between the two are not very clear, and I only noticed it after a bunch of solves. And of course, my Aofu is Dorito modded, so the same mod should theoretically work on the Spark V2 as well. I have been getting slightly worse timings on the Spark V2 than the other two, although the difference is not that clear and luck also plays a role. I've gotten both good and bad solves on all three cubes, and they are all within range of each other. It's not a case of one cube's bad solve being about as fast or maybe even faster than another cube's good solve. So overall, I still prefer the Meilong the most due to its faster speed and smaller size, but the other two still have things going for them. The Aofu is still the most stable and reliable cube of the bunch, while the Spark V2 would work well if you enjoy some kind of extra fluidity and flexibility to flow between turns, and it also has the most unique and different feel of them all that veers more towards the crunchy side. So overall, it's a decent cube and also another viable option to pick from.